right, folks, we'll get kicked off here. Today, our webinar that we're hosting, and thank you to our guest Dylan for joining us and being able to speak more intelligently about the insurance industry than I certainly can. We're going to be talking today about staying cyber insured and compliant in 2026, with the subtext there of why continuous penetration testing is no longer operational. With that, we'll get it kicked off. Dylan, you want to give a brief introduction?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks, Luke. Hi, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Dylan Sotka with Gallagher, and I started my career at Gallagher 20 years ago and have focused all of those 20 years on the financial lines of insurance, including cyber liability insurance. So really helping our customers and our policyholders with obviously the negotiation and the placement of insurance, but more importantly, and as I think you'll find important today, really consulting on the risks, the preparation for insurance, making sure that all of our policyholders are putting their best foot forward with respect to how they'll appear to an underwriter to make sure that they're getting the best possible rates, policy terms and conditions, and coverages that are out there in the marketplace. So looking forward to a good discussion today. Thanks, Luke.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Luke McComey. I'm the Vice President of Offensive Security, Vulnerability Management and Advisory Services at Red Helm. I have worked exclusively in this industry with an offensive focus since 1994. And where Dylan are the side of the house trying to protect you, we do the same, but from a slightly different approach. We're the folks that come in and do the pen testing, vulnerability assessments, all of the different types of activities that you need to do in order to make sure that you are properly protecting your environment and to validate the different control and underwriter type requirements that exist. So we'll jump right into it here. Really, why are we here today? Well, as you have all probably observed, things are rapidly shifting in the information security world, right? Cybersecurity is becoming a forefront kind of primary thought when companies are thinking about how to protect themselves and how to move forward. It's a bit of a change, right? Over the last decade, we've seen people really start to have a more positive shift in this direction, which is good. A lot of it is driven by best practices and people, unfortunately, learning through critical mistakes or issues, right? Compromises, people clicking a phishing link or other types of things. But moreover, we're seeing stricter requirements, both from compliance and from insurance companies, based upon the types of attacks, based upon the types of activities and the things that have happened. Really, our big focus today, as we mentioned before, is pointing out that doing once a year annual type pen testing is just not good enough, right? It is so limiting in the sense that if that's the only thing that you're doing, your data and your information that you're getting back from that type of testing is only as good as it can be until a new vulnerability is discovered, until a change is made within your environment, until somebody clicks a link. It's just the one and done type approach is really what we've been trying to coach people to move away from. By really going through this, we're going to talk a bit about what those insurance and compliance drivers are, really the things that are kind of making these pushes right now. We're going to visit a little bit deeper about what continuous testing really means. And then we'll talk about some practical approaches and ways that you can make these changes within your environment to start taking those positive steps forward. Dylan, you want to jump in on this one a bit?
You bet. So I think anyone who's been purchasing cyber insurance or was involved in any sort of cyber-related matters over the last 5-6 years will remember back to probably starting in about 2020, 2021 during the pandemic. The cyber insurance marketplace changed drastically. And it changed with respect to the cost of getting insurance. It changed with respect to the deductibles and retentions that insurers were imposing on policyholders, essentially forcing everyone to take on more risk and really take more responsibility for the quality of their IT protection. And probably the largest and sometimes the most shocking way in which the marketplace changed was the requirements that insurers mandated and the safety and IT controls that insurers mandated that everyone have as a prerequisite to getting insurance. So prior to 2020, the cyber marketplace was fairly easy. The insurers were making a lot of money. They felt that they knew what their risks were. They felt that they knew the risks they were underwriting towards. And buying insurance, cyber insurance, I'm being a little facetious, but sometimes it was as easy as filling out an application with your name, your address, putting a revenue figure down, and a couple of other ancillary questions. Pardon me. And that was good enough. The game changed for them. They obviously felt that or they found out quickly that the attack vector was changing. The game was no longer lifting out information from systems and exfiltrating information from systems in order to sell it on the dark web. The game quickly turned to ransomware and extorting clients out of money, and that caught the insurers pretty quickly by surprise. And so at that point, they found that their models were wrong. They didn't quite know what they were underwriting to. They didn't quite know what was now causing the new risks that they were insuring, and so they started to underwrite everything. And they really went into a mass gathering mode for information. And so getting insurance went from answering 3 questions to sometimes a 30-page insurance application. And so again, overnight, the insurers drastically changed the way that they look at risk, trying to gather as much information as they could to really pinpoint what was going on there. And so I know that was a lot of very painful for a lot of our policyholders.
Yeah, I think one of the other things where we've seen people really hurt is that, back in the day that you were talking about, right, early 2000s, we saw a lot of insurance companies out there and underwriters that they would ask for pen tests, right, or proof or evidence of pen testing being conducted by a third party. And they were providing vulnerability scans, and insurance underwriters were saying, yep, this is acceptable, this looks fine. We have definitely seen multiple pushback against that now with various companies that are out there. Clear to the far point and the extreme cases have seen in some situations where companies have been compromised. The insurance underwriters or the insurance companies will often go back and look at the information or the evidence that's been provided to them, and they will request to show, has this been something that's been ongoing? Have you continued to do this testing? Is this something that's part of your operating cadence and the environment that you're hosting all of this highly sensitive information in? And if those companies have been compromised and they're not able to show that they've been doing that due diligence, not to beat up your industry, but it gives the insurance companies and those underwriters a chance to push back and say, hey, listen, like, we were insuring you against these specific risks. You've not met the minimum requirements that need to be here. So we're going to push back against whether or not we want to pay in this situation or not.
Yeah, it's a valid point. Obviously, the point is there that we must do what we say that we do. So the application is a part of the policy. It can be used against you in many circumstances. So again, if we say that we are doing penetration testing, and if we say that we're doing it with a certain cadence, we better be doing that on that cadence. To Luke's point, if there are claims, they oftentimes will check back to see whether or not you actually did what you were saying that you were going to do.
Yeah,
and if
definitely.
not, then the policy can be rescinded as if it never existed. So it could be a terrible situation.
Yeah, I can't imagine that if I'd gone in and my threat model, as we've seen with a lot of these customers, are, oh well, I have cyber insurance. It's like it's not a good threat model. And again, if you get into that situation and it's that's what you're banking on, and you haven't done your due diligence, and they're not going to be, if they can or cannot support you, that's going to be a huge factor on whether or not your business is going to be able to continue to operate and move forward. This stuff is not cheap. I think that's one of the things that people don't realize, is the cost of what these incidents really break down to, right? You're asking for somebody that is a limited resource to be immediately available and to drop everything to come help you in these situations. That never comes at a low cost. So we'll jump forward here. Let's ask the audience here. What is your biggest challenge with cyber insurance today? And again, please feel free to answer via the pop-up that just jumped up. Give everybody a few minutes here. And again, if there's something that you don't see in the multiple choice, but you want us to dive into deeper, please put that into the Q&A, and we'll get to it at the end of the conversation here. I'm interested to see what you guys all have here and what you say. All right. Ooh, interesting. We had a pretty even split there with closing required remediation items and demonstrating ongoing security improvements. I'm impressed. One person mentioned that meeting the tighter underwriter requirements has been a bit of a challenge for them. Uh, Definitely surprised by the fact that people aren't saying that they're worried about the cost of the premiums, right? That's news to me. We keep talking to people out there, and price around this stuff has been a big concern. So when I look at our audience's responses, I'm pretty impressed by the fact that it's really, how do we find the time to be able to remediate the issues that have been discovered, and how do we continue to justify and demonstrate the value and the work effort that's happening behind the ongoing security improvements. Thank
Yeah,
you
and I would
for
even jump
participating
in.
in that.
I was actually a little bit less surprised than you on justifying premiums. Didn't get any sort of a response there. And the reason is that over the last 3 years, the pricing of the cyber policies have come dramatically downwards. And so I think a lot of our policyholders have been seeing pricing relief over the past few years. So while there was a drastic spike, and we didn't put a graph in the deck today, but there was a drastic spike in around 2020, 2021, as we spoke about before. But just as quickly as it went up, it's been coming back downhill as well here. So I think that now the focus is on other areas like, can I meet the demands of my underwriters? Can I continue to keep up with the areas that they want to focus on? Underwriters do continuous monitoring of our systems now. So can I continue to keep up with the questions and the alerts that they may be sending my way as part
Yeah,
of the underwriting process?
excellent. Good to know the price is going down too. I think that goes back to, like you were mentioning before, they're getting it dialed in and kind of tuned in, right? Uh,
It's been a self-fulfilling prophecy. So again, when they really increased the demands on us back in 2020, well,
mhm.
everyone listened, right? Everyone wanted insurance. If we said that we must now have NFA in order to get insurance, if we must have EDR, if we must have a 24/7 SOC, if we must be doing penetration testing, everyone's going to do that because they want insurance. And so now, naturally, most businesses out there are safer businesses. Most people are less susceptible to suffering grave damage in the event of a cyber attack. So everyone's more resilient. Everyone can get themselves back up and running quicker, faster, and likely without having to pay a ransom. So while claim activity is on the rise, if you look at it from just a pure numbers perspective, the claim dollars that are flowing out from insurers are actually not rising correspondingly because, again, everyone is more resilient there.
That's awesome. That's excellent. Now we'll jump into a little bit about compliance and really what we're seeing on that side of the house. And when I talk about compliance, we're not necessarily talking about like compliance to the underwriter or a specific insurance side. This is more of like industry compliance and controls. For instance, in banking, with like PCI, for instance, there are requirements around conducting penetration testing and doing segmentation testing, right? So that segmentation part is now something that we've started to see insurance underwriters kind of dipping their toes in, asking the questions at least, maybe not listing it as a requirement, but saying, you know, are you doing things like privilege escalation attack testing? Are you doing things like Active Directory or Entra ID compromise scenario type testing, right? It's these types of little asks where I see that they're taking lessons from the continually improving compliance requirements of different industries, and they're applying those requirements into the policy or into the asks around, like you said, the questionnaires. I agree. The questionnaires that used to be 20, 30 pages now are 3, 4 pages, 5 pages. But I do think that the questions that they're asking are much more consolidated, condensed, and specific, right? Where before we saw very broad language. It's, do you have a firewall? Well, yeah, is it plugged in? But they would ask questions that were pretty wide. Now we're seeing stuff where it's like when you go into cloud and like software as a service type deployments, you'll see questions around API trust relationships, storage exposure, identity to cloud pivoting, and whether that's been something that's been tested. Azure and AWS, GWC control plane abuse, right? These are very specific questions. And again, I think that part of the reason we're seeing this pop up is that the different industry regulatory compliance requirements are starting to mention this stuff by name. The big push, and one of the things we're talking about again, is that continuous assessment approach, right? There's been a lot of companies out there have been doing ongoing vulnerability management now for quite some time. They've got tools deployed. They have someone inside or a team that's inside that's assigned to really help make sure that the scans are run weekly, quarterly, whatever it is. And then they go out and they do remediation against critical activities and issues that are discovered. That's good, and that's a huge positive step in the right direction. But where we see a huge gap is that even in those types of environments, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're making the right choices or that they're informed to be able to have the right decisions around what actions are going to have the most meaningful change within the environment. A good example, and we pick on this all the time, is lack of SMB signing in broadcast protocols. These two different vulnerabilities and weaknesses, if you look at the way that they're rated in almost any industry scanner or tool out there, because they're a CBSS score of 3.2 and 3.6, which is a low to a medium ranked vulnerability, in most environments, those vulnerabilities get overlooked and are passed by, while critical issues like wrong version of SSL on an internal server, which doesn't matter. And again, I'm not trying to go too far in the weeds here, but it's the point of what I'm talking about here is that going purely off of an industry rank score or going off of what the vulnerability scanner is telling you is important doesn't necessarily equate to the actual risk or impact that your business would see if you were compromised. So in the sense that the vulnerability management helps people take the next right step, and doing that continuous assessment helps them keep kind of a finger on the pulse of what's going on in their environment. We're now watching over the last couple of years a big shift where people are understanding that they have to validate those controls. They have to validate the data and the information that's coming back from those vulnerability scanners. And in order to understand true risk and impact to the business, they need to do things like continuous penetration testing and validation of what they're seeing. I think that the second part of this slide that is worthy on touching on is the timeliness side of things, right? Going to a continuous approach with vulnerability scanning, with penetration testing, with social engineering, and other types of services that help you validate your people, process, technology, and data. Those are things that reduce the time in your response when dealing with an incident or dealing with a critical situation. If you're more mature and you have these controls and they're tested and they're in place, you know that they're going to work. It's a higher likelihood that you're going to be able to detect and stop the attack, or at least be able to respond effectively when that incident occurs. I think the other thing that we didn't touch on here, but before we jump to the next slide is kind of important, is one of the specific things we've started seeing called out more and more. And you can talk about whether or not your underwriters have this or not, but we're seeing specific asks around not just continuous testing, but also people doing tabletop incident response tests, where they're actually validating and testing out the plan and the program that they've developed to be able to respond or deal with an incident. Is that something you're seeing more of as well?
Correct. So it really comes down to disaster recovery plans, business continuity plans, and then testing those plans. And again, getting into the tabletop exercises. And so they're keenly focused on making sure that those plans exist, making sure that they're reviewed frequently, oftentimes annually, by qualified counsel. And then again, making sure that the folks who are involved in those plans know that they're involved in those plans, and making sure that we are doing tabletop exercises, sometimes multiple times per year, sometimes tabletops directed at different levels within the organization, for management, for instance, for more technical staff, for instance. So they're definitely keenly aware that this is a big part of protecting the enterprise. And again, it has come up more and more often in terms of underwriting questionnaires and how underwriters are getting a sense for, are you a sophisticated organization? Are you a best-in-class risk or not? And therefore, that translates into, can we demand best-in-class pricing, risk retentions, and terms and conditions at the end of the day?
I like it. I like it. So in other words, if you're doing your due diligence and you're doing the best practices, you're probably going to get better pricing.
100%.
Excellent. All right, there we go. Next question, folks. Which best describes your current approach to penetration testing? Do you do it annually? Test only once a year? Do you do periodic follow-ups? So you do your annual pen test, but then you have us come back and do testing for remediation after you've cleaned things up. We're seeing more and more folks out there with automated vulnerability scanning. We've seen a big uptick this year in people asking for our VMP. And then we see the couple of ones that are there is continuous pen testing is already in place. We have a mix of automated and manual testing. which I honestly hope is where most people are at. And then we don't run pen tests currently. Let's see what folks say. All right, looks like a majority of folks out there are doing annual penetration testing only, once a year and done. There are some that have automated vulnerability scanning, or that it's only automated vulnerability scanning. And in both those situations, I would say that 10, 20 years ago, that was probably good enough. Nowadays, I don't think that that's going to really close the gap. I think we need to see more people moving towards automated manual testing, and definitely continuous testing as well. Of the audience members that we had here, 17%, 1 out of 6 that voted in this poll said that they had continuous testing already in place. At the same time, we had another person that said they don't run any testing at all. So I would definitely, say follow up with your contact that we have here at Red Helm. We'll be happy to have a conversation with you, and we can help make sure that you guys are on the right path moving forward. All right. What is continuous penetration testing? What does it actually mean? Pretty straightforward. The way the name is written. The difference is that, I did a speech called Apples to Apples a few years ago. And one of the big things that I talk about is the frustration that exists within our industry around terminology. When you talk to one company, they'll tell you that they're going to do a pen test. You talk to another company, they're going to tell you that they're going to do a vulnerability assessment. You talk to another company, they're going to say that they're going to do adversarial threat emulation. And then when you see the work report or the output from each of these different companies, honestly, they're about the same. The problem with that is that the name of things actually do have meaning and value, right? If we're doing vulnerability scanning, that means we're doing technical scanning against live hosts within your environment to identify software vulnerabilities and weaknesses, maybe misconfigurations, default passwords, other things like that. It's a good way to get an initial baseline of what's going on within your environment. And that type of scanning should be something that's ongoing all the time, right? So that you always have a good understanding of what that technical risk posture goes. When you talk about penetration testing, that's taking it to the next level. Penetration testing is where you're actually going and validating those different vulnerabilities that are there, and then taking them to the next step by doing post-exploitation activities to try to determine what types of sensitive data stores or critical information, high value targets, personally identifiable information, financial data, whatever it is. What are the types of things that we're able to get at because of exploitation of a human or a misconfiguration, a default credential, or some vulnerability or weakness that's been discovered or picked up inside of the testing and the work that we've done. When you talk about adversarial threat emulation, it's going to the whole other next level. Instead of it being big time being spent on discovery and vulnerability scanning and everything else, adversarial threat emulation, we are replicating a third-party threat actor, like a nation-state level attacker or a threat group that's coming after your business and attacking you. Based upon your maturity is kind of the thing that makes the decision as to which one of these is going to be right for you. If you've never done pen testing a day in your life and you've never ever hardened your environment, basic vulnerability scanning is a great way to get started, right? That'll help you understand the next steps that you need to take and whether or not you're vulnerable or not to, well-known, we call it the low-hanging fruit, right? Well-known vulnerabilities or things that can be easily compromised. Penetration testing is great for any business that has an existing security program or security posture in place. If you've been doing annual penetration testing, moving to a programmatic type approach where we're doing the testing on a quarterly or a monthly basis can be a really good way to go at it. And then if you're a very mature customer, right, you've already been doing the periodic testing, you've already been on top of this stuff, then it makes sense to move to more of an ongoing adversarial emulation or threat approach. Those three kind of different tiers based upon the 3 different maturity levels that you have will kind of help you make sure that you're making the right choice and the right spend. As I've told people before, if you've never done a pen test a day in your life, the last thing you want to do is pay for an adversarial threat emulation because they're just going to come in and beat you up within a matter of minutes. And you're not going to really see a lot of return or value for doing that type of testing without doing the initial hardening. Same thing. is that if you are already have a mature security program, going and paying for continuous vulnerability assessments are probably not going to move the needle much for you, right? They might check a compliance box, but they're not going to help you shift and create big changes within your environment. The other thing that's huge is rapid retesting after remediation. When we do this testing and we provide results to you to tell you where the different vulnerabilities and weaknesses are, we can work hand in hand with you from a programmatic approach with our advisory services or our offensive services and team to be able to help make sure that you are getting that testing to validate that the remediation activity and the effort that you guys have put into cleanup have actually had a positive effect. By doing this stuff ongoing, it makes it to where you're able to trend and show a line of improvement over the period of time that you conduct this testing or conduct this work. And that makes it really easy to justify next year's budget, right? If you can show that at the start of last year in Q1, you had 560 different vulnerabilities, and by the end of the year, you had reduced that number down to less than 50 vulnerabilities with no criticals. There's a very easy way to show the return on the investment of these types of programs. Anything you want to add on this slide, Dylan, before we jump to the next one?
No, nothing on this slide.
Okay, perfect. Really the big thing here and the value of why we do this stuff is helping you discover the different weaknesses and vulnerabilities that are out there. Back in the day when I first started in this industry, when somebody would discover a new vulnerability or release a new exploit, it was a huge deal, right? There were mail lists for this, and you'd get 2 or 3 posts a day maybe of people talking about how something was amazing. If you go look at the way that BugTrack and HackerOne and all these other types of vulnerability discovery and vulnerability bug bounty programs exist now, there are tens of thousands of new weaknesses and vulnerabilities that are being published out every week. So it makes it kind of impossible to think that you could do a pen test once a year and have any idea what your risk posture is going to look like in a month from then or a quarter from then. That's one of the big things about being able to do this is that the ongoing approaches, instead of it being a rinse, wash, repeat year over year where you're seeing the same data, you can focus your continuous assessment in a way that allow you to discover new paths to attacks. It also helps you be able to focus in specific high value target areas of your business, right? If you know where the keys to the kingdom are and you want to make sure that that's really, really locked down. In continuous type of testing approaches, you can say, hey, this quarter, we want you just to focus in this one segment of the environment of the network, right? We've already seen the bigger picture. Now we want to really dive in deeper to make sure that our credit card processing environment or our operational technology environment is secure. The other thing that's nice about this and using this type of program as well is you're going to see an immediate change in the fact that those gaps will get closed quicker. Somebody mentioned in our polls before that one of the biggest challenges they had was the remediation process and being able to take the lessons learned from the pen testing or from the vulnerability scanning and apply that to make a positive change. I would say in those situations, always feel to reach out to Red Helm. We have full engineering and architecture teams that can come out and help you with those remediations and help you implement change within your environment to address the different issues that we discover. I think the other thing here, and I love the little brain picture because it does a good job of really describing the intelligence behind the way that we do this, is that we prioritize the vulnerabilities and the risks that are discovered based upon your business, right? We take the time to understand who your clients are, what your budget looks like, how large your company is, understand your mission, your vision, the direction of where you're going. All of those things are taken into consideration when we do our risk scoring and when we're trying to help you determine what are going to make the biggest positive changes and best next steps for you when applying the information that you've learned from our assessments. Next poll question. This is the last one today for the polls, I believe. How well does your current process support rapid remediation after a penetration test? Do you get it done almost immediately? Does it take a little bit of time because you've got to test and bake stuff off? Do you have backlogs? Does it just never ever happen? I can't tell you the number of times when, pen testing years ago when I used to still be hands on keyboard before I was an executive, we would go do pen testing and we would give the report to the client. Nothing was more frustrating than 365 days later when we would go back to the client to do the testing again, and we'd see this exact same vulnerabilities and weaknesses. In all those situations, it was never that the client didn't want to take care of it. It was that they couldn't ever find the time, the scheduled maintenance window. They didn't have the right resources. They didn't have the right capabilities in-house. So I'll be interested to see what the results are of this one as they come in. right. Looks like they don't have a defined process. A majority of the folks voted that the challenge that they have is that there's just not a proper process in place to make sure that the lessons learned are being applied. Some are also not at all or long delays on the time that they get done, and others say somewhat depends upon the complexity. I'll point out the one that's kind of scary here is that not one of our audience members said that they have a fast turnaround on their remediation, and that means that those vulnerabilities and weaknesses are being left in place. Good lesson learned from the industry. If you go look up the Equifax attack, that was done through a server that had been sitting out vulnerable. I believe it was just a month or two that the Apache Struts vulnerability had been released publicly. And because Equifax missed a series of those servers during a patch cycle, those hosts were able to be compromised, and that led to the release of personally identifiable information of hundreds of millions of folks around the world, primarily Americans. Pretty interesting hack to read about if you haven't seen it before, but definitely something to consider. All right. So we've talked a lot about what it is that, continuous testing is. Dylan, you've done a wonderful job of kind of supplying detail and information about how the industry has shifted and changed. At this point, we'll really kind of talk about how we start applying some of these practical steps for the organization to move forward. But I guess I want to open this slide up and kind of talk about when we think about reaching out, right? If I'm a company and I don't necessarily have the most mature security program, or maybe I don't have one in place at all, and I'm wanting to kind of move more into this continuous approach, right? I want to do something that's not just once a year. I want to do it quarterly or monthly. What are the types of things from an insurance standpoint that I should be considering or thinking about in trying to make decisions or actions around what provider to work with or what program is going to be right for me, right? I mean, every third party I talk to is going to have a different approach or a different thing that they want to do. What are some of the things that from your standpoint we should think about based upon incidents or problems that you've experienced?
As I think about this, I think about the counterparty risk, right? Which insurer are we truly going to partner up with? The insurers that are the most sophisticated out there, the insurers that are truly leading the way here and setting the tone, have really done a great job with their data. And so not only are they underwriting based on specific risk metrics, asking, do you do penetration testing? Do you have EDR? Do you have a SOC provider? All these questions. They're focusing in more on the quality of the providers of those services as well. So again, the insurers with the best data and the insurers who are triangulating the risks the best have really started to pinpoint, where do we see the claims happening? What vulnerability led to the claim? And what service provider, what is the brand name of the service provider who was providing the service that failed, or where something was misconfigured to where threat actors were able to enter the system? So they're now judging us based on who you're doing business with. Who are you hiring to facilitate these services for you? And I've even run into an instance this week alone where the price for one of our clients was now 4x because of a certain service provider that was being used. This insurer had data that said that when we see this service provider providing services, there are threat groups out there that know how to get past what they're doing. And so we either no longer insure those folks, or we have to massively adjust our pricing out there. So again, things have really evolved to where, again, back to my prior point, it used to be 3 questions. Now it's a litany of questions. And now they're not only focusing on what you're doing, but again, who you're doing it with. So that's a new development in the industry.
Yeah, we found that the reporting and the evidence, right? The whole basic used to be an executive summary is not good enough now, right? They want to see risk findings, they want to see proof of exploitation, they want to see remediation guidance and direction, they want to see evidence that remediation is being applied and that there's a process within the environment. All of those types of things are things that can help reduce that cost, or at least your risk profile, I think is how they call it, right? It's really your score on how good you're getting stuff done. When we talk about the practical first steps, really the key is get on the phone, with a trusted advisor. Red Helm, we're happy to jump on anytime with you and have these conversations. our sales folks are queued up and ready to be able to bring the right folks onto the call to make sure that your time that you're giving to us to be able to have these conversations is going to be valuable. The big thing that we try to do is really talk to you about what you're doing currently, whether it's been valuable for you, and whether or not you're ready to take the next steps to mature and kind of move that program forward. Uh, when I tell people to what to look into a pen test partner or how to buy a pen test, again, I have an hour-long speech called Apples to Apples that was given at RBA Sec a couple of years ago. I highly recommend that people go look at that. On here we have 3 bullet points, which are transparency and reporting, frequency and depth of assessments, integration of vulnerability management, and remediation workflows. But there's so much more that you need to be on top of. I see a lot of people that focus on making sure that the pen testers have a certain level of certification. I see other people that focus on making sure that the technical testing team have a certain number of years of experience, right? Or that they follow a specific methodology in their testing, like a P-test type approach. Whatever it is, sitting down and really having those conversations to grill and test the people who are going to be doing this work for you is your responsibility. And making sure that you are armed to ask the right questions is the kind of thing that we can assist or help with. Again, even if Red Helm is not your MSSP, even if we aren't the ones doing your pen testing for you currently, we're happy to jump on the call and have that conversation with you to see if there's a better path forward. The other thing that we do is that we use a process when executing this type of work so that you're never left out of the loop, right? From the very, very first moment that we kick off these engagements, you'll have project management assigned to you, and you'll be working through the penetration testing, the initial gap assessments, whatever it is that you have to do to meet your requirements that are out there for both your compliance and your insurance underwriters. Really, the key is clear and concise communication of how we get from point A to point B. We can do that by establishing that initial baseline and then setting up that continuous testing lifecycle. Once the testing is happening, we'll conduct quarterly QBRs with you, or we'll do monthly type assessments where we can jump onto a call and quickly kind of cover what has changed within the environment. Have we seen a huge uptick in certain number of vulnerabilities or weaknesses because a new piece of software has been released that allows people to easily exploit it? Or does it look like you guys are still trending in a positive direction where you're reducing risk and improving your security posture over time? Again, the key here is just making sure that you find a good partner that can kind of walk alongside you or ride in the saddle with you, as we like to say, to make sure that you get to the place that you're wanting to go. A lot of this stuff gets fairly complex, right? A single once-a-year pen test, most people are used to getting a report that is 300 pages of somewhat unreadable data of a whole bunch of different vulnerabilities and weaknesses. And then they try to apply that information to make a shift or a difference. With these continuous ongoing programs, we have live dashboard software that help you track and trend this stuff over time, assign vulnerabilities and weaknesses. They can tie in with the Nucleus software through our vulnerability management. We can tie into the ticketing system, so it helps with asset inventory as well as vulnerability and tracking as well. Just reach out. We've got a lot of different solutions that can help you kind of take those next steps. All right. And we've got a few minutes here for questions and answers. Let me see what has come up or if we've got anything that's popping up right now. John, do you have anything that's come in through Q&A? Looks like we have one here. If there is a breach, what helps the insurance pay the claim quickly? Dylan, do you want to jump on that one?
If I'm understanding the question, if there's a breach, what helps the insurance pay quickly, frankly, is communication, and it's the quality of the team that's being brought in to assess the situation. So in terms of getting paid quickly, we need to find out the root cause quickly, and we need to understand what our true costs are going to be here. So generally speaking, the cost of a cyber breach come from a lot of different directions. There's going to be the cost of legal experts, privacy counsel. There's going to be the cost of the various vendors who are coming to our rescue to support our efforts to, again, answer all the questions which exist. What happened? Who got in? How did they get in? Where did they go? What did they take? What did they not take? Was it encrypted? What are we going to do about it? And then finally, the cost can come in the form of ransom attempts, extortion payments. They can also come in the cost of lost revenue. And so again, identifying all those costs quickly will then result in you getting paid out quicker and having the insurance do perform its stated purpose at the end of the day.
Yep. Good answer. I think we've knocked that one out of the park there. All right. Well, looks like looks like we were able to wrap it up. Just saw another one come in right as we were getting ready to wrap here. It says, if we were using Red Helm for managed services, Red Helm has designed and implemented the system and is hosting our desktops. Is Red Helm doing the penetration testing now, or should a third party audit Red Helm? So this is an interesting one. Just because we are responsible for your infrastructure does not mean that we're actively doing penetration testing against your environment and your network. Clients need to be engaged as part of that process, right? So if it's something where we are hosting your infrastructure, or we are doing desktop as a service, or whatever it is for you, you still need to conduct penetration testing. That's still something that you need to be talking to your customer rep about and making sure that it's something that is booked and scheduled and on the calendar so that you're executing and getting this stuff knocked out. At least the additional or the initial type testing, we can move you to a more continuous or a programmatic approach once it makes sense from a maturity perspective. But do not assume that just because a service provider, including Red Helm, is hosting your data, that they're doing active penetration testing against your network or your environment. Most of the time, they're just providing the services. With that said, we do a lot of pen testing against customers that are inside of our environments, and we do share lessons learned from that penetration testing with our other customers. So if there's something that we discover within the way that we are doing infrastructure or hosting that is introducing risk or a vulnerability into the customer's networks, often once we discover that, we will apply fixes and solutions across our entire customer base to make sure that that has been addressed and taken care of. But no, do not assume that you're automatically getting pen tests from the work that's out there. The last part of that question is, you asked, should we have a third party test Red Helm? There's two sides of this coin. By having the internal team, the red team within Red Helm do the testing, we have a great amount of intimacy and familiarity with the environments that you are being hosted in. Therefore, we focus our time and our effort on things that are going to be most impactful to you. We focus on the vulnerabilities, the weaknesses, misconfigurations, all the different types of issues that are things that we go after and exploit. If you bring in a third party who isn't familiar with Red Helm's environment, you're going to spend a lot of time and money doing discovery and initial investigation around where different vulnerabilities and weaknesses might lie, what systems are there, all kinds of other types of things that we walk into an engagement already armed with by being part of that provider group. I would also say that, in other cases, we've had a lot of people say, you don't want the fox watching the hen house. Well, the difference here is, again, this is not for an audit. When you work with our red team or our DefSec group as well, we are your partner. We're working hand in hand with you. You should almost perceive or see us as an internal resource where the idea and the goal is the discovery, the addressing of the different vulnerabilities and weaknesses, and then moving forward the program to help resolve those issues and mature your overall security posture. With third-party auditors, for instance, if you have a third-party audit requirement that says that you have to have third-party pen testing conducted each year, and it has to be separate or isolated away from your infrastructure, your IT team groups, those other types of things, then yes, in those situations, you may want to leverage a third party that's outside of Red Helm. The challenge is that it doesn't mean that the results of the information you're going to get are going to be better than the tests that you would see internally. It just means that you're going to be able to easier check that box because you did go with a separate third party. So again, two sides of the coin. It's really the do you need to check the box and have a third party that's separate from your provider, and to ask that question specifically, because a lot of times the only request is that you have a third party outside of your staff. And if that's the case, then we can do that testing. On the other hand, if you're doing it for best practices and trying to improve your overall security posture and awareness of the vulnerabilities and weaknesses, leveraging our internal team and resources is probably going to be the best route. All right. That looks like that's the end of our Q&A today. I want to thank you again, Dylan. Thank you so much for joining us. As it just was posted by marketing, we do have another seminar coming up. It'll be March 19th. Make sure you click the Zoom link and get yourself registered. And until next time, thank you so much for the time.